Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. In this week's episode, we have special guest, also me. Now, the reason why we don't have a guest this week, very simply, is this. My business, Redbeard Solutions, the company that I run when I'm not creating this podcast, does several different things focused around helping companies to build the best talent acquisition and retention machine they can, take the folks they find and build them into highly performing teams. So we help with things like leadership, talent acquisition, and retention. And over the last month or so, I've seen a sizable uptick in the amount of activity around hiring, which is a nice thing to see since that hasn't been the case in the last couple of years. So with that uptick, I've noticed an alarming trend. And I don't know if it's a lack of practice or what we used to call ring rust or what it is, but there's been several instances where companies have lost access to top talent, people they should have landed and frankly needed. Regardless of the state of the economy as a whole or the employer market as a whole, one universal truth remains the same. Your company needs the best talent they can get at the budget that you have for them. So with that said, I wanted to touch on 5 separate things that I've seen of late that need to end. Things that are costing companies like yours top talent. And being a little bit of a social media weasel, I've saved what I think is the most important one for last. I apologize. So the first of these 5 things that I'd like to talk about is when your company doesn't have everyone involved in the hiring decision, not just in the interview process, but everyone involved in the hiring decision on the same page. That's your recruiters, your interviewers, your hiring manager, your compensation person, anyone who's involved in that decision. They need to be on the same page to ensure that a unified message is coming across. Now, one thing I'm going to mention here, and I'm going to ask you to keep in mind as we look through these other 4 things, so I don't have to just repeat it, is this, and that's that the employer opinion of jobs and companies is at an all-time low. Like many of the other institutions here in the United States, and I suspect globally, trust just isn't there. There's been an erosion, a steady erosion over the last several years. If you open up LinkedIn, for example, you're not going to find too many instances of candidates and employees bragging about how incredible the company they work for is. Most folks are up there complaining. And so you really can't afford to be in a position where you're sending an inconsistent message when people come aboard. Why? Because an inconsistent message breeds distrust. People are afraid that you're selling them a job that won't be the same one that they accept should they move forward. So you've got to make sure folks are on the same page as it relates to the presentation they're giving candidates. But in addition to that, you have to make sure folks that are on the same page as to the conditions of the hire. You've got to understand what acceptable is, what good is, and what excellent is. You've got to understand the criteria whereby you are measuring that candidate's ability to do the job that you're looking to have them do. So if people aren't on the same page as it relates to that, you'll have candidates being disqualified that should be put forward, and some getting put forward that are getting disqualified later on in the process and should have never gotten that way. So how do we solve this problem? Very simply, get everyone together who's a part of the hiring decision, a part of this entire hire, before your recruiters start going to market, and talk about, again, what good looks like, what excellent looks like, what exceptional looks like, what start date you're targeting, what salary level you're targeting, what your salary absolute cap is, and make sure that you're pulling, again, towards the same goal. So that's the first thing that I see that you need to fix, is making sure everybody gets onto the same page if they're not already. The second thing that I see that's very often a problem is that you have a chaotic process. By that, I mean you haven't defined who's going to interview whom, at what phase or step in the process, and how interviews are going to go. Because of that, that chaotic process can again turn off candidates. Another thing to mention that's important to understand is that the higher the quality of candidate, the more probable it is that they have multiple options. Top talent, one of the frankly definitions that we use for top talent is folks that have multiple opportunities at any given time. Top talent very often can create openings in jobs. So these folks aren't going to stay through a chaotic hiring or interview process. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't sometimes switch things up by necessity. Sometimes an interviewer isn't available, so you intentionally switch somebody into that slot. That's the nature of things. But where possible, you want as well designed and executed a hiring process as you can manage. Again, because it creates a smoother experience for the candidate. Another thing to keep in mind, you're going to interview several people to hire one. The one that you hire gets the opportunity to learn more about your company, what you do well, what you could improve on, and what makes you who you are. The folks that you don't hire only have your interview process up to the point where they were eliminated to judge what kind of a company you are. Why is that important? See the previous example, people talk on social media. If folks aren't accepted for your role, if they're passed over, they're not necessarily going to be angry about that. Sure, they'll be disappointed in the short term, most likely. But they understand that there's multiple folks interviewing for jobs, and they're not going to be overly bitter. But if they feel like you've jerked them around or treated them poorly or disrespected them, they will rightfully be upset and they will talk about it. So not only do you lose the possibility of this person going forward for another role in the future that maybe they're better aligned to, but you also have them spreading ill will on social media. And I'm sad to report, rightfully so, if you're not treating them well. So make sure your process makes sense. And this leads me naturally to the third thing, and that's poor or no feedback. I need you folks to understand something. Interviewing for a candidate is a very stressful thing. Frankly, for poorly trained interviewers, it's also a stressful thing. But for candidates especially, it's a stressful thing. If your candidates aren't given good feedback consistently throughout the process, they're likely to fill in whatever most scares them into that void of information. The longer that they go without knowing what the next steps are and what's about to happen and how they're doing, the more likely they are to lose interest in your job. Again, the more options that folks have, the less they're going to put up with in terms of a poor interview process. One of the easiest ways to smooth over any chaos in your hiring or interview process is to reach out to candidates. And please keep this in mind as well. The further through the interview process a candidate gets, the more time they invest in potentially coming and work with you, the more emotionally invested they become in the role, and the more likely they are to feel slighted if you don't treat them appropriately. So the type of feedback you give bears a little bit of legal research based on your states. In some areas, there's rules around how feedback can be given and what type of feedback you can share. But the general rule is this: the most usable feedback you can give as early as possible is what's best. At the very least, letting them know what the next step is, when it's likely to happen, and if at some point you determine they're not a good match, letting them know as soon as possible if they're no longer in consideration, but that you would love for them to reach out for future roles. The more consistently you do that with your candidates, the better the user experience you create for your candidates, the higher the reputation that you'll build out in the employment marketplace. People will like your company. It goes without saying that the more people want to work with your company, the larger number of candidates you're likely to see. And one of the biggest ways that you can put guarantees in place that that's going to happen is, again, giving consistent feedback, letting people know what the next step is, what time frame that's likely to happen in, and if something happens that delays that, interviewer's out sick, there's some type of an internal emergency, this role becomes deprioritized, whatever reason, if something changes that timeline, you do that candidate the courtesy of reaching out and explaining, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we have to delay for a week. You are still in consideration, but we're going to be moving a little slower than we anticipated. Look for us to reach out in X number of days. It only takes a couple of minutes, but it goes a long way to building goodwill with potential candidates. And should that person that you're reaching out to be the person, they're going to remember what the hiring process was like. You never want a candidate to think to themselves, oh my gosh, if this is the company trying to impress me with why I would want to work with them, what are they going to be like when there's actually a problem? Okay, so number 3 in our list of bad things is poor and no feedback, and surprising nobody asked how to fix it. Give good feedback consistently. The 4th thing is, gosh, I've been doing this now for over 25 years, and this has not changed. And that's that interviewers aren't selling the job. Folks, every single person your candidate talks to, from the first human being to the last human being, needs to be splitting their time in that conversation between qualifying whether or not this candidate's a match for the role and whether or not they'll fit into the culture of your company, and selling why they would want to. If they're not selling why they would want to, then that you're not giving that person a reason to move forward. I cannot tell you how many times I've had a manager say to me, I didn't really think that we cared for that person the first couple of interviews, but they really started to shine in the 3rd or 4th interview. And in some instances, because folks were selling the job, they were putting in the energy to make sure that that candidate was having a positive experience, that they saw the value in the role, they were able to close that candidate. In instances where they weren't, that person was going through the interview process both to practice and as a backup for a role that they now liked more. So remember, the interview is a conversation, not an interrogation. So the more that you make it that you ask questions, get answers, allow them to ask questions, and you give answers, the more you set that candidate at ease, make them likely to do better in the interview, the more you get the opportunity to sell on why your company is the one they should join, and the more likely you are to know what is exciting to that candidate so you know what to talk about at the end when it becomes offer time. I'll tell you an old sales hack that's been true since sales has been a thing, and that's that if you've taken no time to understand the wants and needs of your prospect, or in this instance, candidate, then the only differentiation you've allowed yourself is money. And I don't know about you, but I'm not in a position to offer every single candidate cap on my salary range. I wish I was, but if I did, I'd be out of business. So again, the more that you understand what is compelling to that candidate, the more likely you are to close them. And the less likely you are to have to always revert to money. I'm not saying for a second you shouldn't offer a fair wage. Of course. I'm just saying if you're selling at cap every single time, that's a crystal clear sign that your folks aren't selling the job. And the only way they're closing candidates at the end is by handing them a pile of cash. The final one, the one that I teased from the beginning in this very short episode designed to solve 5 problems and get you back to work, is time. Let me say that again. Time. In my old staffing days, we used to have a saying, and that's that time kills all deals. The longer it takes from that candidate reaching out with initial interest to a final yes, no, the more probable it is that you will not land that candidate. I say that again. The longer the period of time from initial contact to yes or no, the less likely it is you close that candidate. Now, I know you clearly need to fully qualify your candidates. I'm not suggesting differently. But if for a non-senior permanent hire role, it takes you more than 3 weeks to get to offer, you're taking too much time. If it's an executive role, you might have other things in there that slow things down. But even there, if it's taking you more than 5 weeks, you're taking too much time. If this is a contract or consulting role, well, this person's going to be with you 3, 6, or 9 months, and it's taking you more than a week, you're taking too much time. The longer it takes you, the less probable you are to succeed. If you combine a long interview process with poor or no feedback, you are cutting your candidate pool in half at best, and probably worse. You should take the least amount of time necessary to make qualified decisions during your hiring process. Now, what does that mean? That means that you want to push the hiring decision down to the lowest level in your organization that you can competently make a yes-no hire. There's 2 really important wins in doing this, by the way. The first and most obvious is you're going to get more of the top talent you're looking for because you're going to get to offer faster than your competitors are. The second, often overlooked reason why that's so important is because you're going to be training your managers on how to do an important task and giving them authority with supervision on how to go about that. And that, my friends, in a startup is gold. As your company grows, you want decisions made at the lowest level in the organization that they can be competently made. Now, quick sidebar related tangent on that. Founders. For my very early stage companies, founders typically want to be involved in all hiring decisions. And counter what I just said, I support that fully with caveats. A founder is likely to be able to close a candidate that even the best recruiters in your company couldn't close. Why? Because here in the United States, where most of my listeners are, founders have a mystique about them. There's a cultural mystique that's developed around the founder of a company. And that person will be able to close candidates, ask questions, give direct feedback in a way that other people couldn't and get the same result. Founders really do have that superpower. So if you can utilize your founder, you should. But here's those caveats. Number 1, they should be last in the interview process, or at the very least, extremely close to the end. Why? I'm a multiple-time founder myself. I work with hundreds of founders every year. I speak to founders at conferences. And let me say this, I have yet to see a founder who has a whole heck of a lot of free or spare time. Not that hiring is a spare time thing. I'm not meaning to disrespect what I went through the effort of making a whole episode on, but they don't have time to waste. So you want them in front of candidates who you're reasonably certain are people that you want to hire. That's the first caveat. The second caveat, and founders, please be listening closely to me when I say these words. Going back to the 5th reason that we lose top talent that we should be hiring, time. If you're no longer able to be involved in the interview process without extending it out to some ridiculous length, then you can no longer be a part of it. Save yourself for key hires and extremely senior roles and let your team do their job. Your company is now too big for you to be involved in every single hire. This becomes true of the executive team, then the senior leadership, and then even the middle level leadership as the company goes from startup to Fortune 1000, Fortune 500, etc. I promise you this, the CEO of American Express is not interviewing help desk people. The CIO of American Express is not interviewing help desk people. The director of infrastructure, etc., all the way down. Why? The company is too big. And as a founder, that gravitas, that special magical power you that bring, isn't worth the amount of candidates you'll lose by dragging out the hiring process so that you can bless the hire. Those are the 2 caveats. Now, quick recap. Let's everybody get back to work. Number 1, the 5 things that are costing you the top talent you should be hiring is that everybody in that process is not on the same page. Number 2, you've got a chaotic process. It's as smooth as a country road after a rainstorm, which is to say, if you live in the country, not smooth at all. Number 3, either poor feedback or no feedback. Folks don't know what's coming up next, and they're filling in the blanks, and they're not filling them in with happy stuff. Number 4, the interviewers aren't selling the job. They're not giving that person a compelling reason why they should take you over one of the other opportunities they're looking at. Or they're doing it too late in process. Every person interviewing is also selling. And number five is time. The longer it takes you to get to yes, no, the more qualified top talent you lose. And for every one of those that you lose, your competitor gains 1. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. Super quick episode. Solve these problems. Think of some other ones. There's other things I could have added to this list. Talk about them in the comments below. Make sure if you like this content, you do the like, share, social media dance with me. And until next week, continue being awesome and growing incredible companies.